So I'm absolutely thrilled to be with my predecessor here at First Congregational Church, the Reverend Dr. Gordon Ellis, this morning. The Board of Deacons here voted back in March to make him our pastor emeritus, and we had hoped to have that presentation in person, but the current public health crisis does not allow that. So Gordon has joined me via Zoom, and I'm going to ask him a few questions about his time here and hear some of his stories. So as we come, and then at the end we will actually make an official proclamation. So Gordon, welcome. I'm so glad to be able to talk with you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's so great to be part of this, and I'm very excited and feel very honored by what you've done, and I'm just thrilled, absolutely thrilled. The First Congregational Church has been, I still consider it my home church, even though I've been away from it for 13 years. But I still consider it home. I mean, it's more than any other church I've ever served or even been a part of. So it's very much dear to my heart, close to my heart, and I so appreciate it.
I think I could speak on behalf of those in the congregation who were here during your ministry, that feeling is absolutely mutual. So,
oh, good, thank you.
So one of the things I wanted to hear you talk about a little bit, Gordon, is what First Congregational Church was like when you arrived, and what drew you to accept the call to become the pastor here in 1990.
Okay. I was coming from a place called Seekonk, Massachusetts, which is part of the Rhode Island Conference, and the church had grown a great deal. In fact, it was written up in AD Magazine, which was a denominational magazine at that time, as one of the fastest growing churches in America, which was kind of neat. But I was ready for a new challenge, and so I started looking around at churches, and I saw Southington and kind of began looking into it, and realized that over the 20 years before I was looking at it, that the church had been in a state of decline, and it declined probably by almost 3/4 of its membership, to about it was under 300, 250 and 300 members at that point. And at the same time, the town had grown, had really literally doubled in size, from about 22,000 to 44,000. And I thought to myself, there's something wrong with this picture, and this might be a church where, it's kind of ripe for some church growth and some deepening spiritually, so I began looking more closely at it, and looked at the demographics, and the town was 85% Roman Catholic at that point, and I knew that whatever growth was going to come from the Roman Catholics, disaffected Roman Catholics, and I had lots of experience with that in Seekonk, and I thought, well, this is worth looking into, and so I looked into it, and I really fell in love with the people at Southington right away, and felt a real chemistry there. And the further I looked into it, the more I felt like God was calling me to serve that church, even though it meant, in a sense, a downward, at least temporary downward mobility for me, because I was used to two full-time ministers and a staff, and we had a much larger church community and much more active church community in Seekonk, and I said, well, I think the potential's there, and I really feel God working in my life, and the Spirit calling me to serve this church. And so I came in, and I was extremely lonely at first. That was my first impression, because there was a secretary who was there very part-time, supposedly 9 to 12, but she never showed up until at least 10 or 10:30, and I never could get her. I finally ended up having to fire her. She never would come in on time. I said, we'll change the office hours, and then she'd show up at 11. If we change the office hours to 10, so anyway, and then there was John Parsons, who I love dearly, but who came in on Thursday mornings, and that's all I saw of him during the week. I said, this is a lonely place. and worship attendance was maybe 50 or 60 people when I came, and church school, I'm trying to remember, but I think it was maybe 10, 15 kids, but it wasn't a huge amount of kids, and so it was a real quiet place. In fact, one day I was putting something out on the signboard, and somebody stopped and said, "Oh, this is a real church? I always thought it was a museum." I've been here 15 years. I thought it was a museum. So it didn't make a few of the people in our church too happy when I said that, but it said a lot about the church's image in the community, and so I felt very lonely at first, but it didn't take long for it to start picking up, and like I said, I had a chemistry with the people right away, and I just felt good about it, and I went around visiting everybody. I visited everybody in their home if they would, and that was probably the best thing I ever did, because I got to know the people. I got to know where their heads were at about the church and what their dreams were, and all of that. It was just a great experience to get to know who they were. It built a bond that lasted forever, and every time new people came in, I visited them too. So I really got to know people really well.
That's great. Wonderful. That's great. Well, the second question kind of builds on that one. You were here serving this faith community for more than 17 years. What was one or two of the most significant changes that happened during your time as senior pastor of First Congregational Church?
Well, initially, what I noticed about the church initially, a guy by the name of Eric Hoffer, I found a quote one day that I really love, and I think it speaks to this COVID-19 time too. He said, "In times of profound change, the learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists." And it struck me that, here we are, things are changing, and they're going to change, and that's the way it was in Southington. The people there had been working to try to build the church up for 20 years, and it had done nothing but decline. By the time I came along, they wanted to be learners. They weren't to learn it. They were saying, we want to change. We need change. We have to change if we're going to survive as a community. And I call them the old guard, but the old guard that was there, they wanted to learn. They wanted to grow. They wanted to learn. They had lots of motivation for that, and they were open. And so I was able to come in and help nurture that from experiences that I'd had, and help, I guess, help them find ways to nurture their own spirit. And pretty soon, what I had been preaching right off the bat was that worship and education are the foundation stones upon which the whole church is built. So they need to be the center. They need to be the core of what we do as a community. They need to be the most important thing we do. And I preach that, and I work that, but I think people bought that eventually and understood that. And so as a result, we were able to develop all sorts of new worship styles, new rituals that help people connect spiritually, and find worship exciting and fun, and literally make it, the most important thing that we do. I always tried to preach with a variety of styles, so it wasn't the same all the time. And I told stories. I took up on the Lake Wobegon kind of thing with the Lake Moore stories. And I tried to do teaching sermons. I tried to do sort of fun things with the guitar and songs and building in. And I wanted people to always feel like they were missing something if they missed church. They missed worship on a Sunday, that they didn't know what they were going to miss, and they'd be excited about coming. And so I think one of the most significant change was making worship the core and center of the church rather than something else. It's so easy in churches to get off onto being a social action church or whatever. But worship undergirded everything that we did, and then they were open to new rituals like blessing with anointing and different styles of communion and baptism renewals and all sorts of rituals that they could carry out with them during the week and think about it, and open to new kinds of worship where we use screens and all the rest. Still understanding that that's worship, and that's the most important thing we do. And that attracts new people and different people, and even nurtures their own spirits in ways they maybe don't even understand at first, and then they grow into it. So I think that's the one thing.
Yeah. And that part of your legacy certainly lives on today in the kind of 3 different styles of worship and communion at 2 of the services each week, which is very unusual in the United Church of Christ. Anointing is just one of my favorite and many people's favorite ritual at the 11:15 service. So that legacy lives on.
Good, good.
This sort of builds again on the last question, Gordon. One of the things that I learned early in my time here is that creativity was quite a hallmark of your ministry. The Easter sunrise services, the rally days, the beginnings of the drama ministry. Tell me some of your stories about some of the more creative worship services that you put together here at First Baptist Church.
Okay, I will. My starting question, I always wanted people to experience something, a little fraction of what maybe the first people who went through that experience felt. Just a tiny fraction of it, even just a shock or awe or something to grab them and catch their attention. And so that's where I always started when I thought about creative kinds of services. And so I guess one of the ones that I loved the most was the hot air balloon on rally day, and having a hot air balloon, filling up and then going up, and watching that and talking about the Holy Spirit filling us as a community, as Pentecost, or it wasn't Pentecost then, but on Pentecost, but filling us as a community as we go through this journey together, and it was just a beautiful visual. I wrote a song for it. It was just a beautiful service, and I love that. That was one of my favorites. I love the Easter sunrise service where we had the hearse come in, had the pallbearers come out and bring the casket over to the grave site, and just did that up with then balloons coming out of the casket, and that was fun to do. The very first Easter sunrise I was there, we had an Easter sunrise service. We had people fishing out in a boat, and I invited those people to come in, much to some people's chagrin. And those people ended up preaching to us, cooking us breakfast and preaching to us. And it was just a shock, I think, to the people, but they got the message, which was kind of neat. So some of those services were really fun. We had a unity service for churches all over town, which combined both the more conservative churches and more liberal churches, and had Noel Falstucki here, and he was a part of it, and that was a fun thing to create and develop and be conscious of everybody's needs in the community, so that we didn't have the liberal doing more than the conservative and that kind of thing. It was just kind of neat to do that. So those are a few of them.
That's great. That's great. Yes, those certainly are stories that are still told. In fact, I just back in during Epiphany, there's a beautiful banner of the hot air balloon.
Oh, yeah.
That I think was made in your honor by maybe Judy.
First,
yeah, and it's just beautiful. So we just had that
cool.
out.
Cool.
I'm also aware, Gordon, you certainly walked with this congregation through some very difficult times, difficult losses. You were here during 9/11, times like that. Could you share some experiences when you and the congregation kind of persevered through a difficult time?
I think 9/11 was one of them. I think trying to get that parking lot next door was a long journey for us. And some people liked the idea and some didn't, and that was a struggle to go through that and finally acquire that property. And I tried my whole ministry practically to get that piece of property because I saw it as key to church growth. I think building the addition was a little bit of a change, but and that we endured. But I think the biggest thing of all was, as the church grew, we went through a couple of different stages of church size, basically. And that meant changing programming and the way we did things. And it meant becoming less a feel of a family church or a little tiny community church, and becoming more of a program church, or and more of a church that relied on small groups for people to get connected and feel connected to the church, and helping people understand that they didn't know everybody and couldn't and wouldn't know everybody, was an issue for some, and I think it was a very difficult issue for some. And then maybe the hardest one that we went through was when we wanted to make contemporary worship prime time, so to speak, and bring it into Sunday morning instead of Sunday evening, because we saw the potential for growth on Sunday morning. And that meant adjusting people's schedules. It meant adjusting how people got in and out of the church, and setup, how setup was being done as people were leaving, and how they couldn't mingle and stand around after service and talk, that kind of thing. And that was changing people's ways of doing things that they were so used to, and there was some resistance to that. But again, I think we all agreed that we wanted the church to continue to grow. We just wanted to feel better. And so, but I think we worked through that. We persevered through that, and it never is perfect, but it was a lot better than it was. And I think it worked out.
Yep. Great.
So, and we had the past. Of course, we had some tough pastoral times too, but that's another whole issue.
Of course, yeah. I mean, certainly, I know from my experience here, part of your legacy is certainly the pastoral connections you had with people and walking with people through, very difficult times in their lives. And people still express appreciation for the ways you were able to do that in their lives and on their journeys.
That's good. And a lot of that came from visiting with them and knowing them right up front before the troubles happened. And that was, like I said, that was one of the best things I ever did as far as my ministry was concerned.
Absolutely. Well, another of your legacies here, Gordon, has to do with your commitment to social justice. You led the church through the process of becoming open and affirming, which has a huge impact on our community today. Every Dollar Feeds Kids, the Fundación Sor Domingo Boca in Guayaquil, just name a few of them. Could you talk a little bit about your commitments and those commitments and others, and that helped make the church more faithful to the gospel over your time here?
Yeah. I developed what I thought was a biblically based paradigm of what I call the sacred circle of discipleship, which is three focuses that you walk in a circle all the time, trying to keep your balance with these three focuses: communion with God, community with one another, and ministry with those out in the world. And to me, that's faithful discipleship, and it's biblically based in the Gospel of Luke. And so I would teach that all the time, and so I had this thing about hands-on mission, hands-on. So we didn't just talk about it. We didn't just throw money at it. We actually got involved and did some things to connect people to the mission work, to the people who are being served, if we possibly could, whether it was a local mission like Bread for Life or a Friendship Center, or whether it was a more distant mission like the ones you mentioned. And so mission trips were always an important part, even though I know they're controversial in some areas of the church, some thoughts of the church, but there's no better way to understand and visualize and experience poverty than to walk in those neighborhoods and visit with those families and people and share their experience a little bit, best we can as middle and upper middle class Americans. But anyway, so it was important. But once you get to know those people, they have needs, and you really want to help meet those needs. And to me, it was always a double message. They were ministering to us too. They were helping us understand. They were teaching us, and we needed to do the same back with them. And so it became it wasn't just a one-way mission. I mean, and so mission, social action. When the war in Iraq happened, we made a major stand about that, and so it's that kind of thing. But it was local. I mean, I remember talking to one person who was stuck in a wheelchair and was feeling useless. I don't have any use anymore. And I said, listen, you were a social worker your whole life. You can train our caring ministry people. You can teach them how to minister, how to visit. And I want you to do that. I want you to be their trainer. And I'm going to tell them in the meeting that when you're going to teach them. And God, it was like she came alive, and she had this wonderful ministry going on. So it was both ways. It was local, it was regional, it was international.
Wonderful. That's great. That is what a wonderful vision, Gordon. I appreciate that and benefit from it. I have had the privilege to get to know some of the people you've talked about, and also to go to some of the places, particularly the foundation in Ecuador. And again, your legacy lives on there. And you're right. I mean, it has changed me more than it has changed them. To get to know the girls there, the foundation. So, that's great. So, Gordon, how did being the senior pastor here for 17 years change you?
I didn't grow up with a lot of religion or church, and I didn't really get into religion much until after college, when I had experienced in my life 10 significant deaths of people that were significant people in my life, all of them under 40 except one, between the time I was 12 and the time I was 20. And probably the most significant one happened when I was 14 years old. And my uncle, who was a firefighter in an area town, had a fall off a hook and ladder truck and was never quite the same after. And he ended up shooting and killing my aunt, my father's sister, and then shooting himself. And that homicide suicide, they had a big double funeral, and I was at that funeral, and my little individual family, my close family, was there, and we were off in a corner, sort of by ourselves, because we didn't have any kind of community. And I looked at my cousins, the children of this homicide suicide victims, and I looked at my extended family, and they were involved with such an amazing church community, and they were so part of it that I think for the rest of my days until I got into ministry, I was always yearning for such a community. And in Southington, I found it, and I fell in love, and I really felt, and still to this day feel like that's my community, which is amazing. I've been gone so long, but that's my community, because I just found it and fell in love, and that changed me totally. I became part of that community, but I've been yearning for that for years.
Wow, powerful story. That's wonderful. Just a couple more questions, or actually one more, and then just if you other things you would like to say. As you reflect on your ministry here from 1990 to 2007. Sorry, we're not what are you most proud of?
Well, I could say it was the growth, but it really wasn't the growth of the church. I could say it was a variety of worship, and that's part of it, I think, a little bit. But and I could say it was the building addition or the parking lot or all that, but it's none of that really. What I guess I'm most proud of is how much the congregation embraced that whole sacred circle of discipleship and took it seriously, and felt it and develop programs around it, and really walk that walk of discipleship with communing with God, and the worship life is part of that, and the rituals are part of that. But personally too, in their individual spiritual lives, and building that community around all sorts of different kinds of small groups. We had tons going at different points, with various ways of connecting people, and then doing all that kinds of ministry and social action and mission locally and globally, and I guess that's what I'm most proud of, and feel best about. That we together shared that vision, and grew spiritually together, and it felt good, and it felt like we were part of something big together.
Yeah, wonderful. That's good. Thank you. Great. So I'm going to just give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that you would like to say to the congregation? It's we'll be seeing this on Pentecost Sunday. So any things that you would like to share?
Well, a couple of things. One is how thankful I am to be part of this and to be named Pastor Emeritus. I had a couple stories that I thought of as I was thinking about all this, and I thought they might be fun to share a couple of those stories, and just memories. But and some of them are fun and comical a little bit even, and some are just serious. But I remember filming that PBS holiday special with Noel Paul Stuckey, Michael Kelly Blanchard, and going there 2 days and having to wear the same clothes and sit in the same spot and the whole thing, and that was just a lot of fun, and singing in that choir with that group. But in all the theater productions that were so much fun, and took their toll on the congregation because everything had to change and everything was different for a few weeks, but they were so much fun, and they brought such a sense of community, and watching people, creative people, really attract each other and bring people into the church, and it just kind of grew and blossomed in spite of whatever I did. Just wonderful. But a couple others they're just funny stories. We just created the early morning service and the chapel communion service, and the deacons were pretty good about getting there, but it was new to their plate, and sometimes they forgot, or sometimes they didn't do bread, or they forgot things. And one morning there was no bread, and it was 2 minutes after the service was supposed to start, and I walked out to figure out if I could find some bread somewhere for communion. And Tim Parsons, John's son, was coming up the stairs, just about ready to put a chocolate-covered donut in his mouth, and I said, "Don't eat that. I need it for communion," and I took it away from him. We went in and we used that donut for communion, and I ended up buying him a dozen donuts, I think, later. But it was hilarious. Don't eat that.
It's a funny story.
It was a funny story. Yeah, another funny story was Bill Andres was a trustee, and he decided to paint this rusty pipe that went along down. I don't know if it was downspout or what it was, but along the parking lot side of the church. There was this rusty pipe that drove everybody nuts. So one day he painted it, and it looked really nice. And I went into Claire, who was the secretary at the time, and administrative assistant at the time, and I said, "Claire, just put a note in the bulletin, in the newsletter, just thanking Bill Andrews for painting that pipe that was driving everybody nuts." Well, it came out in the newsletter, "Thank you to Bill Andrews for painting the Pope on the side of the church." She did a typo. And we literally had people coming down looking for the Pope on the side of the church, and ready to be really angry.
Oh, that's funny. That's great.
It was a good one. And two more quick ones.
Sure.
We brought a goat in as part of the scapegoat kind of thing, and Lent, and we put the goat inside the fence of Village Green Nursery School after church, and don't you know, that goat escaped. And I was literally chasing that goat all around the center of town. And Roger Dietz and some other people got involved with it. We finally caught the goat, but it was hilarious to watch us chasing this goat all over town. And then the last one that I thought of was Rick Haverly was preaching during Christmas Eve service, and all of a sudden his phone started ringing, and you could watch him get madder and madder and redder as he was trying to preach. Turns out it was his own phone. It was in his own pocket. It was hilarious. But anyway, those are a few funny stories.
That's great. Yeah. Those do pile up, don't they? That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing those.
But anyway, I do thank you for this.
Absolutely. It's a great honor for you to accept this, Gordon, and for us to be able to recognize your ministry, which indeed changed this congregation in so many wonderful ways over the 17 years. And I have been so fortunate to be able to follow your legacy here into this, as you said, this just unique and wonderful community of people who come together to follow Jesus. And we're so glad to be able to do this. So I want to ask you to open your package now.
Okay.
Edit this part out. This is the presentation part.
Okay, you get it? Whoa, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, we have
Wow.
two of them.
Oh, you do? Oh, cool.
Gordon, on behalf of the Board of Deacons, I present to you this resolution. I know I'm holding it up. We will put a picture of it up when we put this online. I hope folks who are watching this, because you're seeing it backwards. That's the way the camera works. But we present to you this resolution and have a copy for you. And the one we have will go on in the hallway right outside the meeting house, where it will be there to remember this honor. And I want to read this resolution. First Congregational Church of Southington, Connecticut resolution. Whereas the Reverend Dr. Gordon E. Ellis was called as the 25th senior pastor of First Congregational Church in Southington, Connecticut on March 25th, 1990, and concluded his ministry in Southington on October 21st, 2007. And whereas Dr. Ellis served the congregation faithfully for more than 17 years, leading the congregation through a significant period of renewal, growth, and expansion. And whereas Dr. Ellis maintained the highest standard of worship leadership and preaching, pastoral care, and community involvement, offering sacrificial leadership on behalf of First Congregational Church through his skills as a pastor and teacher. And whereas Dr. Ellis worked tirelessly for justice and peace for all God's people, especially hungry children in the poorest communities in the world, including Mexico and Ecuador. Whereas Dr. Ellis earned the respect and love of the members of First Congregational Church and the Southington community, making a lasting impact on the lives of hundreds of congregants and other members of the community that continue to the present day. Therefore, be it resolved that on Pentecost Sunday, May 31st, 2020, the First Congregational Church of Southington, Connecticut bestows upon the Reverend Dr. Gordon E. Ellis the honorary title of Pastor Emeritus in recognition of his significant contributions to the work, growth, and ministry of First Congregational Church of Southington during his long tenure as senior pastor. Signed by Linda Acousti, who's the chair of the Board of Deacons, and by me. So Gordon, congratulations. We are so proud that you have left such a wonderful legacy here, and we wanted to honor you with this designation.
Thank you so much. One of the greatest, literally the greatest joys and honor of my life is serving as the pastor of your church. And I have such wonderful memories, and I appreciate this more than you can know. It's great.
Great.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.